you. Yeah, once again, my name is Mark Gray. I'm the senior wildlife biologist for the Dripping Springs region. I've been at Plateau since 1999, and it's a job that I love, and I enjoy talking with landowners like you. All right, so let's go to the next slide. One of the first things to know when you're managing small tracts of land, you want to be able to talk to a biologist. So before you start the process, get in touch with a biologist. Plateau, there's a lot of, uh, private companies that have biologists that help with landowners. There's webinars like this that you could, join and ask questions, at the end. But it's a great thing to get in touch with a biologist. One of the most beneficial things is talking to a biologist eliminates those um, unnecessary and harmful actions that can occur. And we've seen it. We've had landowners when dealing with brush management take a bunch of brush management off their property and realize we hit a drought and there's a lot of erosion issues and things that can happen. Also, depending on whether types of uses you have in your property, it's important that you're not destroying the land when you're thinking you're doing beneficial things. So it's sometimes good to talk it out with a biologist. The biologist is there to help, create and help you understand what activities are feasible to do and limit that negative action. So it's very important. Biologists are good at understanding the habitat and knowing what's the soil conditions are like. It's very important to understand the soil conditions as well, because if you're moving to a certain direction that you want to move to, those soil descriptions actually help you understand if the property could get there based on soil types, plant communities that are tied with those soil types. And also an important thing before you begin is to understand what your commitment level is. Sometimes you want to be able to know if you're out there. I mean, some of these activities take a lot of time and money, and if you're not able to get out to the property, which is fine, it's just sometimes some of those activities may not be the best suited for that property type. So, and then once again, like in some cases, are you going to hire someone to do these activities for you? So this talks about a lot of the commitment involved with that. All right. So where do you begin? So one of the things that is happening lately is we're getting smaller and smaller acreage tracts, lands being segmented. There are a lot of people that are moving into wildlife management just because properties can't hold the livestock requirements now for appraisal districts. But small acreage tracts is relative. If you're out in West Texas, a small tract of land may be 1,000 acres. And when you get, as you move easterly into Central Texas and even East Texas, some of those pockets of land sometimes get 10 to 15 acres or less. So when you're on your property, understand some of the things you want to analyze for your property is the plants. Know specifically what plants on your property. When I first started at Plateau, I visited a property that the guy had spent a lot of money going through, and he thought he was killing Chinese tallow on his property, but it ended up being cottonwoods, right? So it's important that you know what you're controlling. You don't want to control things that are beneficial. Understanding those habitat types is very significant, especially in dealing with what types of wildlife that you want to manage. Once again, I kind of talked about soil types earlier, but it's important to know how productive some of these things are. If you have goals in mind, can those soil types get there? And if not, how do you improve those soil types to be able to get to where you're trying to get? And that's where it's also very valuable to know what the current and historic usage of the land is. Were they farmers for years and years and years, where some of the nutrients in the soil may be used up. So it's important to understand the current and historic use on the land. When we do wildlife management activities, there's lots of different categories to look for. One of the important ones for wildlife is food. A lot of people, there's different ways of doing that. One of them is putting out feeders for wildlife. A feeder like this in the photo is beneficial because It holds the feed off the ground. It also is targeted for turkeys and other songbirds who can get up off the ground. It does a good job of restricting other animals as well. So that's important too. Not only do you want to promote food for the sources you're targeting, but you also want to eliminate it from other things using it. Uh, we're seeing a lot of increase in interest in landowners that want to manage for pollinators. And so nectar producing plants are important. Wildflower mixes. There's lots of other types of feeders you could put out for hummingbirds and animals like that. So we're seeing an increase in the small pollinators, native pollinators. Also, you could put out various mineral blocks. Not salt blocks, but the complete mineral blocks that you see at stores. So one of the other things that's important is you can manage the existing habitat. So sometimes you get old fields that are kind of dominated by, improved grasses, coastal Bermuda, Klein grass. So sometimes, the act of disking or plowing, what that does is it provides an increase in the other plants, the weedy plants, we call them forbs, but they're even wildflowers will come in, but seed producing plants. So what you're trying to do is create a variety. So you're just improving the diversity of food sources for wildlife at that point. And mowing will knock down, when you have dense grass, it's very restrictive to other things growing. So the mowing is a great activity to kind of bring things down to kind of a neutral kind of competition level. Prescribed fire, though, there's a lot of restrictions using it, but fire is a great tool for promoting a diversity of wild, plants. It helps bring habitat to regenerate, helps regenerate grasses and other things. So it's a great activity. So also growing of food, planting food plots. Like I mentioned up above, the native pollinators. There's a lot of people now that do food plots where they're planting strips of wildflowers for native pollinators. Those could count as food plots for wildlife. You could also plant a lot of different small shrubs. You could plant lots of other wildflowers and other seed producing plants for wildlife. Another important thing is understanding the species that you're trying to target. A lot of times the main ones you see on properties, and some of them are driven by the size of the property too, like deer. Deer are a great target species within certain sizes of property. Because one of the things of the wildlife plan is you need to manage for a breeding, wintering, excuse me, I'm sorry, a migratory species, population of a species. So it can't just be one deer, it's the population. So some of the like deer, turkey, they have larger home ranges. And so it requires a larger space to manage some of those species. But songbirds, pollinators, amphibians, and small mammals, those are all great options for smaller properties. You also want to target non-species, things that, well, so count as an activity, but we can't write a plan. We have to write a plan for native Texas wildlife. And for example, hogs are non-native. The axis and fallow deer are non-native. All right. Water is another important activity for a lot of managers of small tracts of land. The one thing to understand is just having a current pond or a current stream or current lake doesn't necessarily mean it's a qualifying activity, but managing those to expand it, to clean them out, those are all great activities. But it's also good just to assess what types of natural water sources you have on the property, because that allows you to decide if it's important to put out supplemental water sources. Texas has suffered through extended drought periods several years. I mean, the first major one that we had, in the last 15 years, back in 2011, it was horrifying. It was really bad. Then, the last 2 years, we've had horrible drought periods as well. So providing that a year-round water source for wildlife is important. The picture here is what we call a rainwater collection system. So it has a metal roofing and a gutter system that allows water to collect inside that drum. And then there's just an outsource, which that's just a dog pan with a float on it. And just realize that you don't need large um, troughs for what purposes. A point source for water like this water trough, dog pan water trough is excellent for wildlife. All right. Shelter is another big activity. There are a lot of cavity nesting songbirds that need help, that need those cavities. And so providing nest boxes for those animals is great. Bat houses are great. Brush piles are great for cover for wildlife. Mowing is an excellent activity that's done on properties, and that allows for the retention of larger, denser pockets of grass, but it allows that open area for them to maneuver through. Snag management is a great activity in areas of those forest woodlands that don't have or lack that cavity. You could create snags by leaving dead trees up, essentially. That's a great activity. So diversity of plants is the key. So a lot of the activities like brush management is definitely focused on improving that diversity. So whenever things become dense, too much of a good thing is a bad thing. So we do recommend brush management at some point, not necessarily wiping it out, but just kind of thinning it to improve structure. Shallow disking is another great activity. That's kind of what I talked about. The disking of the ground will increase that diversity, which produces a lot of weeds, and weeds are good for bugs. So bugs are good for everything, for food sources. So yeah, timing does matter when you're talking about plants. Some of the activities you can't do. It's better to do at some times of the year, and so that's important. All right, let's go to the next one. Controlling mouse, right? So overpopulation of deer is a big thing, especially Central Texas. So thinning of the animals is an important thing, and exotic species are also dense in some places. So thinning of those is important. We do like to talk about grazing management. Grazing can happen on properties, but it needs to be done in a scale that use doesn't interfere. But grazing can be an important function for habitat control. One of the things that it's important, if you're in an area that has a bunch of smaller tracts, creating management associations or co-ops are great. The more land that you could keep in a certain use, as in like wildlife or even open space use, is important. What happens sometimes is when you get a lot of individuals, you lose some of that. It becomes fragmented if you're not all within the same kind of mentality, right? So you could have people that wipe out their properties, so some of these associations and co-ops are created to help kind of retain structure, and reduce fragmentation. It's also good to pool those resources. So, mowing, the actual livestock, other things like that, people. So it's good these co-ops are not bad to have. Of course, one of the things we always kind of work against is the negative thing. So parasites like cowbirds are a big one. We also have a lot of predators that we worry about, hogs and coyotes, and thinning of those is an important function of a plan or managing your property. Also, fire ants are a big thing. And so that's one of the newest kind of, well, it's not new, but that's one of the big targets for a lot of landowners, is reducing the impacts of fire ants on land. You also want to be able to measure success. A lot of the times, census activities are good to do that. Before and after populations of animals, is your work improving? Are you seeing more wildlife? If you're controlling non-natives, are you seeing an increase in diversity? There are ways of doing that through camera surveys, monitoring bird species. Any kind of measure helps. So, but it's always good to be consistent and do it, in a pattern, so you could draw better conclusions that way. So once it's important to know that private landowners are essential to conservation and wildlife management in Texas. It's important to have, um, you know, to be driven and to get people involved in protecting what's out there. So understanding your land is key to your success. Understanding, and a lot of times that's through surveys, just being out there and seeing, before and after successes of the activities. So it's also good to work on a plan to get your goals. So, and once again, like we said with those co-ops, working with your neighbors could greatly success the benefit throughout your land and throughout the area as well. Once again, thank you. If you have any questions, please let me know. My email is up there, phone number. You can get a hold of us, and that'd be great.